Welcome to Books in the World. I'm Perry Carfunkel, your host for this interview. Books in the World is an interview show that's produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center and the Cape Media Center. The Writers Center was established over 6 decades ago. It sponsors Writers' Night Out evening seminars once a month for 8 months out of the year, which are free to members. It also supports a Young Writers program and sponsors a 4-day writers conference on Cape Cod every summer, as well as a 1-day Pathways to Publishing seminar each April. It also sponsors writers groups open to members. The goal of Books in the World is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communication media. The show has been broadcast continuously since 1978, making it the longest-running writers' support interview show of its kind in the United States. And we thank you for watching today. Our guest today is Josh Boardman, who has been a writer of short stories and novels, as well as authoring a nonfiction book. He works as a creative or developmental editor in New York, and since one of the agendas of the Cape Cod Writers Group is to highlight the process of editing, we invited him for today's interview. It's good to see you, Josh.
Thank you.
Full disclosure, I've worked with Josh as a developmental editor for some of my own writing, and that's how we first met. Before I ask you about your work as an editor, I wonder how your own writing has evolved. When did you start writing?
Oh, I've been writing as long as I can remember, actually. The first story I wrote was about my flamingo beanie baby. I remember sitting at the coffee table and contemplating how to get the flamingo from his lair to, I think, the battlefield it was, and just figuring out how to work that transition. So sure. That was the beginning. That year I wrote a bunch of those and got my classmates to write a bunch of those, and we made a little book. So first publication, 3rd grade.
That's great. Did you have teachers who mentored you?
Yeah, throughout. I remember my 7th grade teacher was very influential in my life, my 12th grade, and then I had college professors as well who were very important to me. One in particular, I remember freshman year, she led the workshop. At the end of the semester, she emailed me and said, "You won whatever secret award was," and she subscribed me for a year to Plowshares, which is like the leading literary journal in the academic world, at least.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I started reading my contemporaries at that time, which I admittedly hadn't really done before college, and then, from there, everything else.
Were there other things that you found helpful in developing your writing skills? Other books or programs?
I think community in general has been very important to me. I've kept a writers group for something like 6-7 years now, meaning just a bunch of peers. We're all kind of in roughly the same stage of our careers, and we submit monthly to each other. We read, we give feedback, and that kind of community support has been invaluable.
That's great. I mean, that's one of the reasons the Cape Cod Writers Center has support writing groups for just that reason. Mm-hmm. When I've seen writers interviewed, I'm sometimes astonished at how widely they've read and how they picked up details about how authors wrote while they're reading and still paying attention to the plot or the flow of the story. How have you done that yourself?
Continually, on purpose and by chance, all the time. I find that my reading and my writing practices are completely intertwined, so that when I'm finding myself feeling bored in my reading, I find myself bored in my writing, and I have to be very deliberate about what books I choose to consume. So, depending on whatever project I'm working on at a given time, and I'm generally working on several different projects, picking one up, putting it back down, doing a different one, I will tailor my reading to that. If I have to write an extremely long chapter, I'll read Marcel Proust. And that helps with length and that kind of tone. I then, in that, will notice the things, the same challenges that I'm confronting in my own writing, and I'll get to see, okay, this man confronted the same problems so long ago in history. What choices did he make to contend with these same challenges? And, I can either say, I hate that choice, I would never do that, or, okay, that's great, I'll steal that, I'll do that thing that he did.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I remember one of our first interactions was you wanting me to read James Baldwin as a way of understanding how he handles dialogue.
Oh yeah, and how he handles romance and how he handles plot, and his novels they have guided me many, many different times in my writing. A totally different experience than reading his essays, which are masterful in their own right, but his novels in particular are like really exciting.
Right. You've been a teacher and an outside tutor in New York. What can viewers expect from having an editor?
Yeah. When I work with students, I think that my role is maybe nominally different than I work with adults. What I mean by that is, with students, I'm working on structure, whether that be like the 5-paragraph essay, argument, whatever that may be. And oftentimes when I'm working with adults, we're also working on structure. Novel is the form that has no form, really, so always trying to find what the author is trying to do with their writing, what authors they're trying to emulate, and then trying to cobble together a structure from that. So that's one of the things for people who don't yet have a draft. When they come to me, we will do a lot of conceptual work. What are the books that you want to be shelved next to yours, for instance? And from there, I can start to get a feeling for what are the goals of this writer, and I can help them, better actualize those goals.
I'm sure. As you go through a manuscript, I'm sure that you're carrying out multiple functions, but one of those is surely trying to come to an understanding of the voice of the author. And I know just in the writing groups that I've been in, my own tendency is to try to rewrite someone else's text the way I would have written it, without always being able to get into the voice that they really have, which is different from mine.
Yeah.
And that must be hard.
Depends on the kind of notes they're looking for. Some people, when they have a manuscript returned, they want to see that. They want to see sentences rewritten and grammar fixed and commas inserted or cut or whatever that may be. And that kind of editing, which I think is maybe more akin to copy editing, kind of a final pass, that's one where I have to have an accurate read on the writer's voice before I'm able to really do that, I think, unless it's just standardizing things. But the way that I've sidestepped that particular problem in the past is I don't think editors should really very often be copy editing, actually. I think editors should be reading what's on the page, trying to understand the intention of the author, and then either asking questions, pointing out opportunities, waving flags in different parts of the manuscript where it's like, okay, looks like you held yourself back here. Maybe don't hold yourself back here. And in that way, you're sort of drawing the writer out rather than papering over anything that they have written there.
So that almost sounds like what some people describe as being a beta reader.
Yeah.
Or a beta editor for people. I think, is that something that is the place people should start, looking for a beta reader to get an idea of what's missing, what needs to be added, or?
Eventually, that's
Yeah.
not where they should start. They should finish the draft first.
Okay.
I think a lot of people try to find beta readers before they should. And it's my experience that a writer should try to complete the draft, try to get it as developed as they can to a place where they're really proud of it, and then seek out those beta readers. Now, I don't think that they should be seeking out a single beta reader. I generally advise the authors that I work with to find as many as they possibly can. So just so that we're clear on terms, beta reader is somebody who comes to a draft of a novel. They don't have any allegiance to you necessarily. They don't have any context for the project. And they're able to then look at that and give the author feedback just as any reader that picked it up off the shelf could do, you know? It's extremely difficult as a writer to be able to guess the way that the audience will respond to your work. So the way that good authors counteract that is they assemble the beta readers around them, and they can kind of cobble together that reaction from beyond the veil, as it will, you know, outside of the author and their subjectivity with their work.
So I guess that brings up the big picture question of what are the different kinds of editing that writers can benefit from?
All kinds. I think that that writers can benefit from children reading their books. I think that writers can benefit from their family and friends reading their books. In terms of the services that I've offered in the past and like the professional level of services beyond just in general finding readers and finding people that you trust, there's kind of 3 different phases of editors or coaches or whatever you may call it. There's early work, which is writing coaching is generally a term for that, where if a writer has an idea, but they're not sure how to execute on that, they'll come to somebody who hopefully has a lot of experience executing novels or whatever genre they may be in. And they work with that person to find a structure that fits them, setting up goals and running through the exercises that I've talked about already. You know, just kind of trying to get a feel for what they're trying to do. So that's the kind of conceptual work that happens in the first phase of writing coaching, for instance. And then, you know, the writer will go on their merry way. They will write a book if all goes well. And then there's a second kind of editing that can happen at that point. So that is developmental edits. That's similar to beta reader status, except a developmental editor really has experience looking at work and trying to put it in the context of, you know, whatever genre it's trying to be a part of, and then, you know, trying to make that work more what the writer wants it to be. So that's drawing out the voice of the writer, as we were talking about before. Second phase, developmental edits. Third and final phase is really something that happens far at the end of the process, you know, copy editing. It's when you have an editor look at your work, check it for consistency, for instance, check it for grammar, make sure that everything is in pristine condition so that, you know, in the ideal world, it can be published, go to print, whatever little phrase you want to use. So that can really, if I'm doing that job, the copy edit, I really want to pass that back to the writer and feel that, okay, if they decide to self-publish this on Amazon tomorrow, for instance, I can be proud of the work that's put out.
Fine. So I remember you had told me early on that the first steps in editing involve really adding flesh onto the bones of a manuscript, so readers can envision the location in which the story is happening and see the natural responses of the characters in the various scenes. I remember you always wanted to know what things smelled like when I went into a restaurant or a cafeteria. And then it was a much later step where you had to determine what could be cut, so that how to make a story lean and know what to do to cut that.
Yeah.
And that's always hard. So before a writer gives you that kind of manuscript, how can they start to do that on their own self-editing?
Yeah, I mean, you might say that the process of writing whatsoever in the very beginning when you're writing your first draft is, you know, the initial creation of flesh, right? Taking the clay, throwing it on the table, getting hopefully as much of it there as possible so that the later steps can really be carving around that. But I've found that the writing process really is kind of always an alternating process of like expansion and then contraction, you know? So it's not necessarily earlier and later where, okay, in these early stages, we're going to add flesh, we're going to add the smells and the tastes and, you know, what's being served to eat. These are like my go-tos. I always want to know what's being eaten, especially. And setting and, you know, any of those, I think, base level craft elements that, you know, you're writing your first draft, you're not accounting for all the elements of craft. Obviously on that, you're kind of going where the passion is taking you. So oftentimes that first pass will be like, hey man, I don't even know where we are right now. Can you tell me what the room is like? What does it smell like? So that I can really feel as a reader like my feet are on the floor here. That's early. They can start to then blow out that draft if they find that they don't have enough clay on the table, so to speak, you know. And then, you know, you start to cut it back. You say, these elements of setting are actually not any more relevant to your story. So I don't care about the kitchen table anymore because they never go to the kitchen table. So you put as much stuff onto the page as possible, as much flesh, as much clay, whatever the metaphor is. And then you cut it around the story and what's relevant to the characters or what you want the reader to see. You know, Chekhov's gun, for instance.
Well, I mean, I remember that process very well. It struck me when you or a beta reader who had helped with a different manuscript would make suggestions like that, and then I would go and try to flesh things out the way you described. And it gave me a personal satisfaction that, you know, I felt I could run up a flight of stairs 3 at a time. And that's actually how I got involved in the Cape Cod Writers Center, is that sense of the emotional aspect of being a writer and feeling myself growing as a writer and feeling my capabilities grow. And I'm sure that must make you feel good too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my own life, I think that my personal growth has tracked pretty closely to my growth as a writer, actually. So that as I worked out how to incorporate my writing practice into my daily life, I've just become a more stable person in general. You know, when you're going to the table every morning, you can't stay out all night. You got to get there. You got to show up and do the work. So I think that for me, writing has been a way of life, and being able to guide other people who are aspiring writers into similar circumstances and watch them grow that way is extremely satisfying. Yeah. It's like a religion or something.
Well, that's true, but that also leads into a segue to what we all hear about all the time, which is artificial intelligence. And I mean, do you have the sense that artificial intelligence is going to be able to improve that process of saying, you need to flesh this out. You need to tell me more. I mean, it's easy to correct sentence structure and grammar and punctuation, but the part that for me has been so important in having an editor has been the growth of my story, the expansion, the depth, the increased depth that I didn't have there before. And I don't have a sense, I mean, maybe you do. Is that something artificial intelligence is capable of doing, or?
Well, I love AI personally. I'm really interested in experimental and avant-garde forms. So things like this, a new tool is put onto the table and everybody starts calling it like the end of the end of the novel or something. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, let's break this down, you know? I think that it's important to understand its limitations. You know, it's difficult to tell ChatGPT to write me a scene, for instance. Right. Okay, my editor tells me that I really want to see more conversation at the dinner table or something. So, right. Okay, AI, go ahead, give me some more conversation at the dinner table. It's going to give you crap. It's going to give you, you know, it's been fed on a diet of literally every single site on the internet. So it's going to spit out the grossest mean of every single site on the internet and every book, and it's not going to have any personality or anything. It's a good tool to use for research, for instance. If in my own writing, for instance, I was interested in the concept of laughter. So I was like, all right, let's see what ChatGPT has to say about laughter. So show me 10 different bodily descriptions of how laughter exhibits itself, for instance. So, okay, prints off like 10 of them. I'm like, that's okay, that's stupid. You know, you kind of find what's interesting about it and what's not, and then inevitably you rewrite it because it is still that gross mean when it spits it out at you. So I'm really interested in all of the different ways that AI can be utilized as part of the writing practice. It has, whenever I've been like, oh my God, it's so amazing for this one thing, or I can see it streamlining part of the process that I find distasteful in writing, it has disappointed me like utterly. So.
But it sounds like you see a potential for it almost like a thesaurus of expanding, you know, how can I describe laughter?
Yeah, or what are some biblical references to laughter? Spit out every biblical reference to laughter. Or it's like a search engine, Wikipedia, Thesaurus. It's like a strange book to have at your table, basically. So if you, like me, are somebody who likes to kind of randomly open pages to books and get inspiration in ways of chance like that, it's like a really fun tool.
And is ChatGPT the one you usually use, or are there others that you've used?
I've used a bunch of them. ChatGPT is cool because it's free. It's a little stupid. I've used Claude, which is also a little stupid, but they're all a little bit stupid. You just learn how to talk to them, and then it'll tell you something and you say, no, that's not what I mean, something like this instead, and then it'll give you something else, and you just have to learn how to guide it, really. You know, when you're using a thesaurus, you will, if you have no idea what the word is, you'll say, okay, happy, and then you'll see all the different synonyms for happy,
right.
And you're like, okay, that wasn't it, so I'm going to take this synonym for happy and look up that one now, and you know, you'll follow it down the path in that way. So AI can be used in sort of a similar way.
Do you envision it as a process that can make a story more lean? Can it, you know, look at text and say, you don't need that paragraph or you don't need that scene? And
I wish. Not in my experience. It seems pretty bad at that kind of thing. And I always say that, like, if you want to feel good about your writing, if you're down on yourself for any reason, feed it into ChatGPT and say, so what is your opinion on this? Because it's going to say, oh, this is beautiful. It's written so vividly. Everything about this is perfect. And you can walk away and say, wow, I'm the best writer. That's so great. When in reality, what you get from a human editor is, you know, it is kind of an editor's job to gas the writer up to a certain extent, to make them feel good about their writing and highlight the good bits. But they also have to say, these are the good bits that you want to aspire to. Now here's the other bits in your writing where you can do that here. So just do that, but do it here. You know, and AI can never do something like that.
yeah, it's interesting. But my wife is working her way through the Barbra Streisand 900-page memoir.
Wow.
and you know, there was a review in the New York Review of Books commenting that she really could have used a good editor. But the same reviewer also said that some of her aside comments were really pungent and contributed to the overall impression that the reader gets of who is Barbra Streisand. And so, you know, I mean, I don't know how ChatGPT can separate those, whereas a human writer, editor can see that, can say, you know, this is a nugget here, you know, keep that, and
Yeah.
or even expand on it.
Yeah, I mean, you could feed Barbra Streisand's memoir into ChatGPT and say, make this half as long, you know, and it will. It'll probably find some way to identify what's a digression and what's not, and just get rid of it over and over again. But just to go back to Proust, 7 books,
Right.
if you try to feed that through and say make it shorter, like, the point is sometimes the digression. And that's something that I think, that's something that's really, for me, at the core of writing and at the core of reading, is what is the individual texture of this piece or of this person, and how is it being translated onto the page? So there's no objective measure of that, right? Like ChatGPT can't determine any objective measure for how this book should be edited. It's very emotional, it's very intuitive. You know, I think it's borderline mystical.
You remind me of a scene I saw in one of Rick Steves' stories of traveling in Europe. I'm not sure if it was in Switzerland or someplace else, where people typically dive into the river at one point and intentionally just swim downstream. And in a way, that's sort of what reading Proust is like, of, you know, let me just immerse myself in it and go with the flow.
Yeah.
And feel the depth and the warmth of it and see how that'll go.
Yeah, I mean, writing is experiencing God, I think. Not necessarily a Christian God, but whatever the little daimon of that piece is.
Right.
In getting to know this little personality.
Can you describe your own writing routine for our viewers and what tips you may have that you learned of ways to work more effectively in writing?
Yeah. The best tip that I can give to writers looking for tips is stop looking for tips. I have, many times over my life, I have said this is the way that one must write. And then a week will pass and I'll reach some crossroads in my writing and I'll be like, I remember what I said last week. However, in this case, it is clearly does not apply. And so everything ends up eating itself in the end. What has ended up being my writing practice that has lasted now for 12 years, something like this, is I like to get up in the morning. I like to go to a public place, cafe usually, get a coffee, put on big headphones, turn music up real loud, and then write for 2 hours, something like this. Put it aside and don't think about it until the next morning, when I will then type up what I had handwritten the day before so that I get back into the groove of it, and then write on by hand from there. So I have a little 1-2 movement that I do every day. Might work for some people, probably won't for most.
But the physical writing by hand helps.
Absolutely, yeah. And I like unlined paper.
Okay. What are you reading these days?
I'm bouncing between the Proust, obviously, and I'm reading George Eliot with one of my students right now, Mill on the Floss.
Great.
Boring as hell. What else have I been reading? I've got a Clarice Lispector on my nightstand right now that I think is not well regarded, but it says on the back that it's her favorite book that she wrote, so
Okay.
that's going to be the best book.
Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this interview and would like to see more, you'll find that there's links to other interviews on the website, capecodwritercenter.org, or through our Facebook page and on YouTube. The website also offers links to our events as well as links to books published by our members. Thank you for watching Books on the World.